Imagine getting a wedding invitation from your abusive ex-husband, not just any invitation. Table 47, the back corner, near the bathrooms, where they put people they want to humiliate. Now imagine showing up anyway, in a silver Bentley, with a billionaire, and the baby they tried to steal from you. This is the true story of Valerie Harper, a woman who fell in love with a charming millionaire, only to discover she'd married a monster. He hit her. His family enabled it. They tried to take her newborn baby while she was still bleeding from emergency surgery. They had money, power, and a legal system that protected them. She had $43 and nothing left to lose. What happened next shocked the entire country. A viral documentary, a courtroom battle that made headlines, and two weddings that changed everything. But this isn't a revenge story. It's a survival story. And the ending? You won't see it coming. Stay until the end to hear how one woman turned Table 47 into her greatest power move. And if this story moves you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your comment could save a life. Let's begin. Valerie Harper sat on her worn couch in her small Denver apartment, morning light streaming through cheap blinds. The cream envelope in her hands felt heavy, embossed with gold lettering that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, 4 months pregnant, barely showing under her oversized sweater. The invitation read, "Brandon and Christine Mitchell request your presence. River Oaks Country Club, Houston, Texas. Black tie required." And there, in elegant script at the bottom, Table 47. Valerie's fingers traced the number. Not Table 1, where family sits. Not even Table 20, where friends belong. Table 47, the back corner near the kitchen doors and bathrooms. The place you put people you're obligated to invite, but hope won't show up. They wanted her to see exactly where she ranked in their world, but there was something they didn't know. Something that made her hand shake as she held that invitation. She was carrying Brandon's baby. His daughter. The one he'd tried to take from her the moment she was born. The one a judge finally gave back to her 6 months ago after the longest legal battle of her life. And she was about to tell a story that would burn their perfect world to the ground. Let me take you back to where this nightmare started. 18 months earlier, Valerie Harper was a different person. She was 30 years old, working as a marketing manager at a mid-sized firm in Dallas, fresh off a move from Minneapolis. Middle-class background, practical upbringing, ambitious enough to take chances. She believed in love. She believed in good people. She believed in fairy tales. That's how Brandon Mitchell found her. At a Dallas Arts Gala, the kind of event where her company bought a table to look important and sent their young employees to network. Valerie wore a department store dress and practiced her elevator pitch in the bathroom mirror before walking in. Brandon wore a custom suit and confidence like cologne. He was 35, third-generation owner of Mitchell Luxury Auto, 5 dealerships across Texas. Old Houston money, River Oaks mansion. That effortless charm that rich men wear when they know exactly how to make women feel special. Valerie was standing by the bar trying to look sophisticated while drinking cheap wine when he appeared beside her. Brandon said, "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." Valerie turned, startled. Brandon Mitchell. She'd seen his face on billboards. Mitchell Luxury Auto, where excellence drives home. She said, "Is it that obvious?" Brandon smiled. "Only to someone who feels the same way." Brandon Mitchell. "And before you ask, yes, those dealerships are mine. And no, I don't actually enjoy these things either." Valerie laughed despite herself. Valerie Harper, marketing. "And I thought these events were supposed to be glamorous." Brandon said, "They're work pretending to be fun. The worst combination. Can I buy you a real drink, not this wine that tastes like regret?" She should have said no. She should have recognized the practiced smoothness, the way his eyes assessed her like she was something he wanted to own. But she was new to Texas, lonely in a city of strangers, and he made her feel seen. That's how it starts. Not with violence, with attention. The flowers started arriving at her office the next day. Roses, lilies, orchids, each arrangement more extravagant than the last. Her coworkers gathered around her desk, giggling and envious. The note on the roses, "Dinner? I promise I'm more interesting than these flowers." She texted yes. What followed was a whirlwind so dizzying she couldn't catch her breath long enough to question it. Private jet to Napa Valley for wine tasting, front row Mavericks tickets, weekend in Santa Fe where they stayed in a suite that cost more than her car. He introduced her to his world, country club dinners where everyone knew his name, charity balls where photographers snapped their photos, exclusive restaurants where maitre d's bowed. Brandon made her feel like Cinderella. She didn't notice she was slowly losing her glass slipper. The comments started small. At dinner one night, Brandon said, "You look beautiful, but you'd look stunning in something more elegant. Let me buy you something." Valerie said, "I can't let you do that. These clothes are fine." Brandon said, "Fine isn't what I want for you, baby. I want you to shine." He took her shopping on Rodeo Drive, bought her dresses that cost what she made in a month. She felt guilty accepting them, but he insisted. Brandon said, "You're my girlfriend. Let me spoil you." At parties, he'd pull her away from conversations, his hand on her lower back, steering, possessive. Brandon would say, "These people aren't on our level, baby. Why waste time?" When her phone buzzed with texts, he'd glance at the screen, casual, just checking. Brandon asked, "Who's texting you? Just making sure you're not getting hit on." Valerie laughed it off. "He's just protective," she told her friend Sarah over the phone. "It's sweet." Sarah, who'd known Valerie since college, said, "Val, I don't know. It sounds a little controlling." Valerie said, "You don't understand. He's not like regular guys. He's successful, confident. He knows what he wants." Sarah said, "What do you want?" Valerie didn't have an answer. 4 months into dating, Brandon proposed. They were on the rooftop of his flagship dealership at sunset, Dallas skyline glowing orange and gold behind them. Brandon said, "Valerie Harper, you're the realest thing in my fake world. Everyone around me wants something. Money, status, connections. But you just want me. Marry me." The ring was 5 carats. Valerie's hand looked too small for it. She said yes. She called her mother in Minneapolis, crying happy tears. Her mother said, "Are you sure? You've only known him 4 months." Valerie said, "When you know, Mom." The wedding happened 2 months later. Small ceremony at the Mitchell estate, Brandon's family home in River Oaks. Sprawling mansion with columns and gardens straight out of a magazine. Margaret Mitchell, Brandon's mother, organized everything. She was a woman who wore pearls like armor and smiled with her mouth but never her eyes. Margaret said to Valerie during dress fitting, "The Mitchell family has certain standards, dear. I hope you understand what you're marrying into." Valerie said, "I love Brandon. That's what matters." Margaret said, "Love is lovely, but legacy is permanent." At the wedding, Margaret barely smiled. Brandon's sister, Patricia, spent the entire ceremony on her phone, posting Instagram stories with captions like, "When your brother finally settles down." Interesting choice, #surprised. Brandon's father, Gregory, gave no toast. He left early, citing business. During photos, Brandon gripped Valerie's arm too tight, his fingers digging into her bicep. Brandon whispered, "Smile bigger. You look ungrateful." Valerie smiled until her face hurt. That night in their honeymoon suite, Brandon was gentle and loving. He brought her champagne in bed, kissed her forehead, called her Mrs. Mitchell, like it was the most precious thing in the world. Valerie thought, "See, everything's fine. Sarah was wrong. I made the right choice. The mask doesn't slip all at once. It peels away slowly, so slowly you don't notice until it's completely gone and you're staring at a stranger." The first week of marriage felt like playing house in someone else's mansion. Brandon went to work early, came home late. Valerie explored the River Oaks house, feeling like an intruder. Every room was decorated by Margaret. Every dish in the kitchen, chosen by Margaret. Even the towels in the bathroom had Margaret's monogram. Then 1 week after the wedding, Margaret moved in. She knocked on their bedroom door at 7 in the morning. Valerie was still in pajamas, hair messy from sleep. Margaret said, "Just temporary, dear. Gregory and I are renovating our home. We'll be here a few months." A few months became 6 months, then indefinite. Margaret took over the kitchen. She redecorated the living room. She criticized everything Valerie did with the polite venom of Southern women who've perfected the art of insult disguised as concern. At breakfast, Margaret would say, "Your coffee is interesting. Do you not know how to use a French press? Or that outfit is very Minneapolis, very casual. Or you've gained weight. Marriage agrees with you, I suppose. Patricia visited 3 times a week, always with her phone out, always recording. She posted photos on Instagram with captions that seemed innocuous but cut deep. A photo of Valerie cleaning. When you marry up but still gotta earn it. Hashtag Cinderella. Hashtag work hard, play hard. 2,000 likes. Comments ranging from oh my god, brutal, to she's trying so hard, to gold digger vibes. Valerie saw it, confronted Brandon that night. She said, your sister is posting mean things about me online. Brandon barely looked up from his laptop. It's just a joke. God, you're so sensitive. Valerie said, a joke? She basically called me a servant. Brandon closed his laptop with a sharp snap. This is why my family thinks you're not cut out for this. You can't handle a little teasing. You're being dramatic. Valerie said, I'm not being dramatic. She's being cruel. Brandon stood, his voice dropped to that dangerous quiet she was learning to fear. Brandon said, my sister is family. You're complaining about family. That's not okay, Valerie. That's not what Mitchell wives do. He walked out, slept in the guest room that night. Valerie lay awake, wondering when she'd become the problem. 2 months into marriage, Brandon insisted Valerie quit her job. He said, Mitchell wives don't work. It looks like I can't provide. Valerie said, but I love my job. I'm good at it. I just got promoted. Brandon said, you don't need to work. I make enough for both of us. Valerie said, it's not about money. It's about having something that's mine. Brandon's face darkened. Yours? What's yours? You live in my house. You drive my wow. You wear clothes I bought you? What exactly do you bring to this marriage, Valerie? Because from where I'm standing, you take a lot and give very little. The words hit like slaps. She felt herself shrinking, getting smaller. She quit the next week. Her boss, a woman named Linda who'd mentored her, said, oh, Valerie, I've seen this before. Please reconsider. Financial independence matters. Valerie said, he's my husband. He wants to take care of me. That's good, right? Linda said, caring for someone shouldn't mean controlling them. But Valerie didn't listen. 2 weeks after quitting, she realized Linda was right. She had no income, no independence. Every credit card was Brandon's. Every account had his name. She'd made herself completely dependent. Her friend Sarah visited from Minneapolis, booked a hotel, planned to stay 3 days, catch up, see Valerie's new life. Brandon was cold from the moment Sarah arrived. He barely spoke at dinner. When Sarah mentioned staying at their house instead of the hotel, Brandon said, does she need to stay here? We have hotels for a reason. After Sarah left early, cutting her trip short because the tension was unbearable, Brandon said, your friends are users. They're jealous of what you have now. That's why she was so uncomfortable. She can't stand that you've moved up. Valerie said, Sarah's been my friend for 10 years. Brandon said, and now you're in a different world. She doesn't fit here. The sooner you accept that, the happier you'll be. Valerie stopped inviting people over, stopped calling Sarah as much. The isolation happened so gradually she didn't notice she was being cut off from everyone who loved her. 3 months into marriage, Valerie suspected she was pregnant. She took the test alone in the bathroom, hands shaking. 2 pink lines. She felt terror and hope in equal measure. That night at dinner, she told Brandon. Just the two of them. Margaret mercifully out at some charity function. Valerie said, I'm pregnant. Brandon's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. His face went through several emotions, shock, then something dark, then forced happiness. Brandon said, are you sure it's mine? The question hung in the air like poison. Valerie stared at him. What? Brandon, we're married. Of course it's yours. Brandon immediately backtracked. Baby, I'm sorry. That was stupid. I'm just surprised. This is huge. This is wow. He stood, hugged her. For a moment, she believed it would be okay. A baby would fix things. Love would fix things. She'd learn soon enough. Nothing fixes a man who doesn't want to be fixed. The charity dinner was held at River Oaks Country Club, the kind of event where everyone wore their wealth like badges and competed to seem the most philanthropic. Valerie was 2 months pregnant, morning sickness making everything smell overwhelming. She wore a dress Brandon picked out, green silk that cost more than her first car. Margaret kept introducing her as Brandon's wife without using her name. As if Valerie Harper had ceased to exist, replaced by Mrs. Mitchell, a role she was failing to play correctly. Valerie tried, she smiled, made small talk, pretended she belonged among women who'd never worked a day in their lives and thought poverty was a personal failure. That's when she met Christine Beaumont. Christine was 28, worked at Mitchell's flagship dealership as Brandon's marketing director. Tall, blonde, beautiful in that effortless way that made Valerie feel plain. She stood alone by the bar, looking as uncomfortable as Valerie felt. Valerie approached, grateful for a familiar face. "Christine, I didn't know you'd be here." Christine's smile was tight. "These things are mandatory if you work for the Mitchells." Valerie said, "Tell me about it. I'm married to one and they're still mandatory." Christine laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. Valerie, trying to make conversation, said, "So are you seeing anyone? Brandon mentioned you're around our age. I thought maybe we could double date sometime." Christine's face went white. She set down her wine glass with a sharp click. Christine said, "I'd rather not discuss my personal life." She walked away quickly, leaving Valerie confused. A society columnist, an older woman dripping in diamonds, leaned over. "Honey, you didn't know? Christine just broke off her engagement last month. Called off the wedding 2 weeks before." Pretty raw topic. Valerie felt her stomach drop. She found Christine, tried to apologize, but Christine had already left. The drive home was silent. Brandon gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. Valerie kept glancing at him, trying to gauge his mood. She said, "I didn't know about Christine's engagement. I was just trying to be friendly." Brandon didn't respond. She tried again. "Brandon, I said I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset her." Brandon said one word. "Shut up." Valerie went quiet. Her heart started racing. Something was wrong. This silence felt dangerous. Halfway home, Brandon swerved the car onto the shoulder of the road, stopped abruptly. The sudden stop threw Valerie forward against her seatbelt. She said, "What are you doing?" Brandon turned to her. His face was transformed. Not the charming man she'd married. Someone else. Someone scary. Brandon said, "You made me look like an idiot. Like I can't even teach my wife basic social skills." Valerie said, "I apologized to her. I didn't know." Brandon's hand shot out, grabbed her arm. His fingers dug into her flesh so hard she gasped. Brandon said, "Sorry doesn't fix embarrassment. My mother saw, Christine saw, everyone saw how clueless you are." Valerie said, "You're hurting me." Brandon squeezed harder. "Then maybe you'll remember next time. Maybe you'll think before you open your mouth and humiliate me." Tears streamed down Valerie's face. "Brandon, please, the baby." He released her suddenly, stared straight ahead, started driving again. Silence filled the car like smoke, choking them both. At home, Valerie ran to the bathroom, locked the door, looked at her arm, finger-shaped bruises already forming, purple, angry, proof. She heard Brandon outside the door. Brandon said, "Valerie, baby, please come out." She didn't move. Brandon said, "I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. The stress at work, the pregnancy news, everything just exploded. I've never done anything like that before. Please forgive me." He was crying. She could hear it in his voice. He sounded broken. She opened the door. Brandon was sitting on the floor, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. He looked up at her with red eyes. "I swear to you, I will never do that again. I swear on our baby's life." Valerie wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. Because if she didn't, it meant she'd married a monster. It meant her fairy tale was a nightmare. It meant everything she'd given up, her realm, her friends, her independence, was for nothing. She said, "Promise me." Brandon said, "I promise. It was one time, one mistake. It won't happen again." That's what they call the honeymoon phase of abuse. The explosion, then the apology, the tears, the promises. And you believe them. Because you have to. Because the alternative is too terrifying to accept. But of course it happened again. 3 weeks later, Valerie called her mother without asking permission. A 15-minute call to tell her about the pregnancy, hear her mother's excitement, feel connected to home. When she hung up, Brandon was standing in the doorway. He said, "Did you ask before making long-distance calls?" Valerie said, "It's my mother. I was telling her about the baby." Brandon walked toward her slowly. She recognized that walk now. Predatory. Brandon said, "When you live in my house, eating my food, spending my money, you ask before making long-distance calls. Do you understand?" Valerie said, "Brandon, that's ridiculous." He pushed her. Not hard, just enough to make her stumble backwards against the wall, hard enough to steal her breath, hard enough to establish power. Brandon said, "Don't call me ridiculous. You're living in luxury because of me. Show some respect." He walked out, left her standing there, shaking. That night, he brought her flowers, apologized, said work stress was getting to him, promised it wouldn't happen again. She was learning the cycle. Tension building, explosion, honeymoon period. Repeat. A month later, Valerie tried to cook dinner for the family. She'd found a recipe for pot roast, spent all day preparing it, wanting to prove she could do something right. Margaret took one bite, set down her fork with elaborate precision. Margaret said, "This is edible, I suppose." Patricia across the table took a photo of her plate, posted it to Instagram immediately with the caption, "When the help tries to cook." Bless her heart. Valerie felt tears sting her eyes. She excused herself, locked herself in the bathroom, cried quietly so no one would hear. Brandon found her, knocked on the door. She said, "I'm fine, I'll be right out." Brandon said, "Open the door, Valerie." She did. He looked angry. Brandon said, "Stop being dramatic. You're embarrassing me in front of my family." Valerie said, "Your sister just humiliated me online. Your mother—" Brandon said, "My mother has hosted presidents, governors, people who matter. And you think your pot roast impresses her? You think crying in the bathroom makes you sympathetic? You're weak, Valerie. That's your problem." He left. She heard him go back downstairs, heard laughter from the dining room. When she finally came down, her pot roast was in the trash. The table was cleared. No one had waited for her. No one had saved her a plate. She went to bed hungry, 4 months pregnant, alone in a house full of people. The worst part? Margaret knew. Margaret saw everything. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Valerie and Brandon were arguing in the kitchen about credit card bills. She'd bought maternity clothes, nothing extravagant. Target, Old Navy, basics because her regular clothes didn't fit anymore. Brandon held up the credit card statement. $300 for what? Valerie said, "Maternity clothes, I'm showing now. Nothing fits." Brandon said, "You don't need $300 worth of clothes to sit at home." Valerie felt something inside her snap. Months of tension, isolation, criticism, abuse, it all bubbled up. She said, "I'm growing our child, your heir, the precious Mitchell grandchild everyone keeps talking about. I need clothes that fit." Brandon's face went dark. He stepped toward her. Brandon said, "Watch your tone." Valerie said, "Oh, what? You'll push me again? Grab me again? What's it going to be this time, Brandon?" He shoved her. Hard. She stumbled backwards into the counter, hip hitting the marble edge with a sharp crack of pain. And Margaret walked in. She stood in the doorway, took in the scene. Valerie on the floor, Brandon standing over her, fists clenched, the tension thick enough to choke on. A beat of silence. Margaret set down her purse calmly, as if she'd just witnessed something completely ordinary. Margaret said, "Brandon has a temper, like his father. You'll learn to manage it, dear. I did." She walked out. Valerie sat on the kitchen floor, hand on her belly where the baby kicked, and thought, "Oh my God. She knows, and she doesn't care. This is normal to them. This is what Mitchell women do. They endure." That night, Valerie Googled signs of domestic abuse on her phone under the covers, read articles that described her life with terrifying accuracy. Isolation from friends and family, financial control, escalating physical violence, cycle of abuse. She was a textbook victim. How had she not seen it? But seeing it and leaving it were two different things. Where would she go? She had no job, no income, no savings. Her family was in Minneapolis. Her friends had drifted away. She was 4 months pregnant with Brandon's child. And despite everything, part of her still hoped. Maybe the baby would change things. Maybe becoming a father would fix him. Hope is what keeps us trapped longer than we should be. The ultrasound appointment was on a Thursday morning. Brandon took time off work, which surprised Valerie. He'd been distant for weeks, throwing himself into the dealerships, coming home late, sleeping in the guest room more often than not. But this morning he held her hand in the waiting room, kissed her forehead, acted like the man she'd fallen in love with. The technician spread cold gel on Valerie's belly, now rounded at 5 months. The screen flickered to life, gray and black shapes that gradually resolved into something recognizable. A tiny human, curled up and perfect. The technician said, "Healthy heartbeat. Everything looks perfect. Do you want to know the gender?" Brandon said, "Yes." The technician smiled. "It's a girl. Congratulations." Brandon's eyes filled with tears, real tears. Valerie hadn't seen him cry since their wedding day. He said, "That's our baby. That's our daughter." He kissed Valerie's hand. She felt hope bloom in her chest like spring flowers after a long winter. In the car, Brandon was gentle. He drove carefully, as if Valerie were made of glass. Brandon said, "I'm going to be a better man. For her. For you. I mean it, Val. No more losing my temper. I'm going to be the father I never had." Valerie said, "You mean it?" Brandon said, "I swear, she deserves better than what I've been. You both do." That night, he brought home baby furniture catalogs, paint samples for the nursery. They sat on the couch together, actually happy, planning their daughter's room. Brandon said, "Let's do yellow. Gender neutral, happy, fresh start for all of us." Even Margaret softened. She came to dinner that week with a vintage bassinet from when Brandon was a baby. Margaret said, "A Mitchell grandchild. Finally. This changes things, Valerie. You're carrying the family legacy now. That means something." For 2 weeks, Valerie believed it. The baby had saved them. Love had won. Brandon went to work and came home on time. He asked about her day. He rubbed her feet when they were swollen. He talked to her belly at night, telling their daughter stories. Valerie let herself imagine a future. Maybe not perfect, but survivable. Maybe even happy. She should have known better. It was 3 in the morning when Valerie woke up cramping, sharp pains in her abdomen. She stumbled to the bathroom, turned on the light, and saw blood. Not much, just spotting. But at 5 months pregnant, any blood is terrifying. She shook Brandon awake. "Brandon, wake up!" He sat up, groggy. "What?" Valerie said, "I'm bleeding. Something's wrong with the baby." His face shifted from sleep to panic. They drove to the emergency room in silence. Valerie's hand on her belly, willing the baby to kick, to move, to be okay. The ER doctor examined her, ordered an ultrasound. The minutes felt like hours. Finally, the doctor came back. "Baby's heartbeat is strong. Everything looks normal. But you need bed rest. Stress isn't good for pregnancy. Are you under a lot of stress?" Valerie said, "I'm managing." The doctor, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, noticed the bruises on Valerie's arms. Old ones, yellow and fading. Newer ones, purple and angry. The doctor said, "Are you safe at home?" Valerie said, "Yes. Why would you ask that?" The doctor held her gaze. "Just asking. There are resources if you need them. Social workers, shelters, legal help." Brandon was in the parking lot on his phone when Valerie was discharged. In the car, he was furious. Brandon said, "You almost made me look like I hurt you in there. That doctor was looking at you like you're some battered housewife." Valerie said, "She saw the bruises. I couldn't exactly hide them." Brandon said, "So cover them better." "Jesus, Valerie, do you know what happens if someone calls CPS? They take the baby. They investigate us. Our reputation gets destroyed. Is that what you want?" Valerie said, "No, Brandon, I would never." Brandon said, "Find your own way home. I have a meeting." He pulled over. They were still 15 minutes from home. It was 4:30 in the morning. Valerie said, "You're leaving me here? I just came from the hospital." Brandon said, "You have a phone. Call an Uber. Or call that friend of yours, the one who's so worried about you. See if she actually helps." He drove away, left her on the side of the road. Pregnant, spotting, fresh from the ER. Valerie called Sarah, her college roommate, her oldest friend, the one she'd pushed away over the past months. Sarah answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep. "Val, what's wrong?" Valerie said, "I need help." Sarah said, "We're here. Where are you?" 8 hours later, Sarah pulled up in her minivan. She'd driven from Minneapolis to Dallas overnight, stopping only for gas and coffee. She found Valerie at a Denny's, huddled in a booth, running out of places to hide. Sarah took one look at her and said, "Get in the car." On the drive back to the Mitchell house, Valerie used Sarah's phone. Brandon's phone was on the passenger seat where he'd left it, unlocked. Text messages open. The first message was from Christine. "Can't wait until you're free. The baby doesn't change anything. We have plans." Brandon's response, "Just a few more months. Lawyer says the prenup is airtight. She gets nothing." Valerie's hands shook. She scrolled up. Months of messages. Photos of houses they were looking at together. Furniture they'd picked out. A life they were planning. Without her. More messages. This one from Margaret to Brandon. "The pregnancy is actually perfect timing. File for divorce. Claim she's unstable during pregnancy. Judge will grant you custody once baby's born. She signed in the prenup. She has no legal leg to stand on." Valerie felt bile rise in her throat. She handed the phone to Sarah, who was driving. Sarah glanced at the screen, eyes widening. "Oh my God, Val." Valerie said, "They've been planning this since before I even got pregnant. They want my baby. They don't want me. They want her." Sarah pulled over. Valerie opened the door and vomited on the side of the highway. When they got back to the house, Brandon was there, waiting, and he wasn't alone. Brandon, Christine, Margaret, Patricia, Gregory, and a man in an expensive suit. They sat in the living room like judges at a trial. Wedding magazines on the coffee table, an engagement ring in a Tiffany box. Brandon said, "There you are. We need to talk." Valerie felt Sarah squeeze her hand once, then let go. Sarah couldn't be there for this. She had a husband who worked with Brandon. 3 kids, a mortgage. She couldn't risk everything, even for her oldest friend. Sarah whispered, "I'm sorry, I can't stay." She left. Valerie was alone. Christine smiled, sweet as poison. "Sorry you had to find out this way." Valerie said, "Find out what? That you've been planning your wedding to my husband while I'm pregnant with his child?" Margaret said, "Don't be dramatic. This marriage was a mistake. We're rectifying it." The man in the suit introduced himself. "I'm James Rutherford, Mitchell Family Counsel. We're prepared to offer you a settlement." He slid papers across the coffee table. Valerie forced herself to read them. $100,000. Sign an NDA. Terminate the pregnancy. Walk away clean. Valerie looked up, shocked. "You want me to abort my baby?" Margaret said, "It's for the best, dear. You're not equipped to be a mother. Certainly not a Mitchell mother." Patricia was filming on her phone, grinning. "This is gold. The look on her face is perfect." Valerie turned to Brandon, her husband, the father of her child. She said, "Say something. This is your daughter." Brandon said, "Sign the papers, Valerie." Valerie said, "No." Brandon threw a different set of papers at her feet. They scattered across the hardwood. Brandon said, "Then we do this the hard way. Divorce papers. You get nothing. The prenup you signed into protects all Mitchell assets. You have no obligatory job, no income, no family here. And when that baby is born, we'll prove you're an unfit mother. CPS will take her the day you give birth." Gregory spoke for the first time. "We have evidence. Your mental instability, history of depression after your father died, your inability to maintain relationships, your isolation, your lack of income or housing. Any judge will see you're unfit." Rutherford said, "Sign the divorce papers now. We'll allow supervised visitation after the birth. Fight us, and we'll make sure you never see that child again." Margaret stood, smooth her skirt. "You have 24 hours to decide. Choose wisely, dear." They left, all of them. Left Valerie standing alone in a house that had never been hers, holding papers that would take away everything. She called Sarah. "I don't know what to do. They're going to take my baby." Sarah said, "Listen to me. Get out right now. Don't pack. Don't think. Just get in your car and drive. That night, while Brandon was asleep, Valerie climbed out the bathroom window, first floor, thankfully. She landed hard in the garden, 6 months pregnant, wearing pajamas. She grabbed her purse from the car, drove away with nothing else. At a gas station, she tried to use her debit card. Declined. He'd already frozen her accounts. She had $43 in cash. She Googled domestic violence shelter near me, Safe Haven Women's Shelter, 24-hour intake. That was the night she realized no one was coming to save her. Not Sarah, not the police, not some fairy godmother. If she was going to survive this, she had to save herself. The Safe Haven Women's Shelter was a nondescript building in a part of Dallas that tourist maps didn't include. Fluorescent lights, institutional furniture, security cameras, bars on the windows that were there to keep danger out, not keep residents in. Valerie walked through the door at 2:30 in the morning, pregnant, in pajamas, with $43 and a broken heart. The intake coordinator was a woman in her 40s who'd clearly seen everything. Her name tag read Linda, not the same Linda from Valerie's old job, but the kindness in her eyes was similar. Linda said, "You're safe here. He doesn't know where you are. You did the right thing." Valerie started crying, the kind of crying that comes from deep inside, from months of holding everything together. She cried until she couldn't breathe. Linda handed her tissues, waited, didn't rush her. Finally, Valerie said, "I'm pregnant. I don't have any money. I don't even have clothes." Linda said, "We have everything you need. Maternity clothes, prenatal vitamins, an OB who donates her services. You're not the first pregnant woman to come through these doors. You won't be the wedding." Valerie's room was tiny. Single bed, shared bathroom, a window with bars for safety. But it was hers. She locked the door, sat on the bed, and cried until dawn. The next morning, Valerie filed a police report. Detective Maria Rodriguez, a specialist in domestic violence cases, took her statement. Rodriguez said, "I believe you. I see these cases every day, but I need you to understand something. The Mitchells have money. Money means lawyers. This will be hard." Valerie showed her the photos on her phone. Bruises, medical records from the ER visit, text messages she'd screenshotted from Brandon's phone before she ran. Rodriguez said, "Good. Document everything, every text, every call, every threat. We're building a case." At the courthouse, Valerie filed for divorce, citing abuse, filed for a restraining order. The court-appointed lawyer was Jenny Walsh, 27 years old, drowning in cases, doing her best with a broken system. Jenny said, "I'm going to be honest with you. I have 60 cases. The Mitchells can afford to drag this out for years. You signed a prenup. Best case, you get supervised visitation and minimal child support." And Valerie said, "That's the best case." Jenny said, "I'm sorry, the system isn't built for women like you." 2 weeks later, the Mitchells filed their counterattack. Valerie was in her shelter room when Jenny called. Jenny said that they filed first. Emergency custody petition. Claims you abandoned the marriage. Fabricated evidence of emails you supposedly sent, threatening Brandon and his family. Witness statements from household staff, all saying you were unstable, violent, unfit. Valerie said, "Those are lies. I never sent those emails. The staff barely knew me." Jenny said, "They can afford to pay people to say anything, and they filed a restraining order against you, claiming you threatened Brandon, that you're dangerously unstable." Valerie felt the world tilt. How is this happening? I'm the victim. Jenny said, "They have money. Money buys a different kind of justice." The preliminary hearing was a nightmare. The judge was an old friend of Gregory Mitchell. He seemed to believe everything the Mitchell lawyer said, questioned everything Jenny presented. The judge granted temporary custody to Brandon, ordered Valerie to undergo psychiatric evaluation, set trial date for 6 months away, conveniently after the baby would be born. Valerie sat in that courtroom, 6 months pregnant, and realized she was going to lose her daughter before she even held her. But then something unexpected happened. Someone had been watching the local news. Someone who knew what it felt like to lose a sister to domestic violence. Someone who had more money than the Mitchells and a reason to care. Adrian Sterling was 37, self-made tech entrepreneur based in Austin. He'd built a company that created security software for Fortune 500 companies, sold it for $200 million, and spent his time trying to figure out how to make money mean something. 5 years ago, his sister Katie sat across from him at a coffee shop, bruised and pregnant, and said, "He says he's sorry. He loves me. It won't happen again." Adrian said, "Katie, please, let me help you leave." Katie said, "I can't. I have nowhere to go." 3 months later, Adrian went to Katie's funeral. Her husband had killed her when she was 8 months pregnant. Murder-suicide. Both Katie and her unborn son died. Adrian had spent every day since trying to live with that failure. When he saw Valerie's story on the news, pregnant woman fleeing wealthy husband, powerful family trying to silence her, he saw Katie. He called the best lawyer he knew. "Monica Graves, it's Adrian Sterling. I have a case for you." Monica Graves was 42, former prosecutor who'd specialized in domestic violence cases before leaving the DA's office to start her own practice. She was expensive, $50,000 retainer, but she had a reputation. She didn't lose. Monica called Valerie at the shelter. "Ms. Harper, my name is Monica Graves. I'd like to represent you." Valerie said, "I can't afford you." Monica said, "You don't have to. Adrian Sterling is covering your legal fees. He runs a legal fund for domestic violence survivors. Will you let me help you?" Valerie said yes, because what choice did she have? A week later, Monica brought Valerie to Adrian's office in Austin. Modern glass building, minimalist design, the kind of place that said, "I have money but don't need to show off." Adrian stood when she entered, tall, dark-haired, with eyes that had seen pain and survived it. He said, "Ms. Harper, thank you for agreeing to meet me." Valerie said, "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." Adrian told her about Katie, the warning signs he'd missed, the funeral he couldn't forget, the guilt that followed him everywhere. He said, "I couldn't save my sister. Maybe I can help you save yourself." Valerie said, "I don't need charity." Adrian said, "It's not charity, it's justice. Monica is the best. With her, you have a fighting chance. In return, I'd like you to do something. Tell your story, on camera. A filmmaker I know specializes in social justice documentaries. Your story could save lives. Help other women recognize the signs." Valerie was suspicious. She'd learned to be suspicious. "And that's it? No strings?" Adrian said, "No strings. I have more money than I know what to do with. Let me use it for something that matters." Valerie said, "Okay, I'll do it." Monica took over the case with the force of a hurricane. She filed motions to get Judge Peterson recused due to conflict of interest. His country club membership, shared with Gregory Mitchell, created appearance of impropriety. The motion hearing was tense. Peterson didn't want to step down. But Monica presented evidence of bias, connections, conflicts that couldn't be ignored. Judge Peterson recused himself, reluctantly. The new judge was Patricia Rodriguez, no relation to Detective Rodriguez, but equally no nonsense. Known for protecting domestic violence survivors, known for not tolerating wealthy men who thought money bought immunity. Judge Rodriguez read the case files, looked at Brandon's lawyer, and said, "We're going to trial. Discovery begins immediately." Monica turned to Valerie as they left the courthouse. "Now we fight." Over the next 3 months, Monica's team worked like they were preparing for war. Because they were. They found other women, Brandon's ex-girlfriend from college, who signed an NDA after he broke her ribs, his first wife, Rebecca, who he'd almost killed when she was pregnant 15 years ago. 3 other women, all with similar stories, all silenced by money and fear. They found Christine's history. Her previous boyfriend had abused her too. She'd gone to the Mitchells thinking she was escaping one nightmare, walked straight into another. They found evidence of Margaret's pattern, covering for Gregory's affairs, intimidating victims, using money as a weapon. They even found that Patricia had embezzled $200,000 from the Mitchell family charity, money that was supposed to go to women's shelters. The irony was almost funny. Monica said, "They're not untouchable, they're just rich, but rich people break laws too." Meanwhile, a filmmaker named Jessa Williams interviewed Valerie at the shelter. Camera, lights, microphone, the works. Jessa said, "Tell me your story from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." Valerie talked for hours. Everything, the whirlwind romance, the red flags she ignored, the abuse that escalated, the family that enabled it, the system that failed her. By the end, Jessa was crying. Valerie was exhausted. Jessa said, "This is going to change things. I promise you. People need to hear this." Valerie said, "I just want my daughter back." Jessa said, "You'll get her back. And you'll help save other daughters too." But first, Valerie had to survive the hardest part. She had to give birth. Labor started at 2 in the morning. Valerie woke up to her water breaking, contractions starting strong and fast. She was 9 months pregnant, alone in a shelter room and terrified. The shelter staff drove her to county hospital, the only one that took her Medicaid. Labor and delivery looked like every other hospital, but lonelier. Women with partners, family support systems, and Valerie alone. A nurse said, "Is anyone coming?" Valerie said through a contraction, "No, it's just me." Labor lasted 18 hours. Long, exhausting, painful hours where Valerie begged for epidural, got it, then prayed for the whole thing to be over. But at hour 18, something went wrong. The baby's heart rate dropped. Alarms started beeping. Doctors rushed in. A doctor said, "We need to do an emergency C-section. Baby's in distress, Mrs. Valerie said, "Is my baby okay?" The doctor said, "We're going to make sure she is." Valerie was awake for the C-section. Epidural, curtain blocking her view, the strange sensation of pressure without pain as they cut through layers of her to reach her daughter. Then she heard it, the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby crying. The doctor said, "It's a girl, she's beautiful." Valerie said, "Can I see her?" The doctor held up a tiny red-faced baby, perfect, alive, hers. But then, she needs to go to NICU for observation. Low birth weight, 5 pounds 2 ounces. She'll be fine, but we need to monitor her. They showed Valerie her baby for maybe 10 seconds, long enough to see her face, not long enough to memorize it. Then she was gone. Valerie woke up in recovery hours later, groggy from anesthesia. She was bleeding heavily, too heavily. A nurse said, "Miss Harper, you're hemorrhaging. We're going to give you a transfusion." Valerie said, "My baby." "Where's my baby?" The nurse said, "She's stable in NICU. You can see her once you're stable." Valerie passed out again. 24 hours later, Valerie woke up in a hospital room. IVs in her arms, bandages on her abdomen. Everything hurt. And sitting in the chair beside her bed was Margaret Mitchell. Valerie said weakly, "Get out." Margaret said, "The baby's in NICU. Grace Margaret Mitchell. Yes, we named her. She's a Mitchell after all." Valerie said, "You don't have the right to name my baby." Margaret said, "Actually, we do. Brandon filed emergency custody motion while you were in surgery. Judge granted temporary order. I have the papers right here." She slid documents onto Valerie's bed. Margaret continued, "You'll get supervised visitation 1 hour twice a week if you behave." Valerie said, No, you can't do this." Margaret stood, smoothed her skirt in that infuriating way she had. "It's already done, dear. She's ours now. You should have taken the 100,000 and walked away." Valerie started crying, still bleeding from surgery, unable to even stand, and they'd taken her baby. Her daughter, the child she'd just given birth to. She said, please don't take my baby." Margaret said, "We're not taking her. We're saving her. From you." She left. Valerie pressed the call button. A different nurse came. Valerie said, "I need to see my baby. Please, I need to see Grace or Bihai." The nurse looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, there's a legal order. You need approval from the Mitchell family lawyer before you can visit." Valerie said, "She's my baby. I just gave birth to her." The nurse said, "I'm so sorry. I can't go against the court order." That night, Valerie lay in her hospital bed with empty arms. Her breasts ached as her milk came in. Milk for a baby she couldn't feed. Milk for a daughter she couldn't hold. She called Monica, voice breaking. Valerie said, "They took her. While I was in surgery, they took my baby." Monica said, "I know. I'm filing an emergency motion. We're going to get her back." Valerie said, "When?" Monica said, "I don't know, but I promise you, we're going to fight like hell." That was Valerie's rock bottom. Not the abuse, not the escape, not even being homeless and pregnant. It was giving birth to her daughter and not being allowed to hold her. It was producing milk for a baby who was in a different room with people who wanted to erase Valerie from her life. That's when Valerie realized something fundamental. They could take everything from her except her will to fight, and she was going to fight like her life depended on it, because her daughter's life did. She discharged herself from the hospital the next day against medical advice, went back to the shelter, started working with Monica on the case that would determine everything. But then Brandon went public. Decided to destroy her reputation before she could destroy his. He called a press conference. Brandon, Christine now visibly pregnant with his child, Margaret, and a PR team. Brandon read from a prepared statement. My ex-wife has made serious allegations against me and my family. These accusations are completely false. Valerie Harper suffers from mental instability and has fabricated these claims in an attempt to extort money from my family. A reporter said, what about the abuse allegations? Brandon said, completely fabricated. I have never and would never harm a woman. My fiancée Christine can attest to my character. Christine stepped forward. I've known Brandon for 3 years. He's the kindest, most gentle man I've ever met. What Valerie is doing is not only wrong, it's damaging to real abuse survivors. A reporter said, Ms. Beaumont, are you pregnant? Christine smiled, put her hand on her belly. Yes, Brandon and I are expecting. We're very happy. Within 24 hours, the Mitchell PR machine was in full force. Article in Houston Chronicle, Brandon Mitchell, victim of false accusations. Leaked documents, Valerie's therapy records from when her father died, obtained illegally, twisted to make her look unstable. Headlines, mentally unstable woman uses pregnancy to trap wealthy ex. Social media campaign, hashtag I stand with Brandon trending nationally. Patricia's Instagram video of her crying, my brother is the most loving man I know. This woman is trying to destroy our family because she's jealous that he's moved on. Hashtag false accusations. Hashtag men too. Comments poured in. She looks crazy in her photos. Gold digger trying to get paid. Poor Brandon, hope he gets custody. Women like her make it hard for real victims. Someone found out which shelter Valerie was at, posted the address online. Protesters showed up. Signs. False accusations ruin lives. Believe men too. Valerie Harper is a liar. The shelter had to move her to a different location for safety. Valerie said to Monica, I can't do this. Everyone thinks I'm lying. The documentary hasn't even aired yet, and I'm already convicted in the court of public opinion. Monica said, then we release it now. Jessa, how fast can you finish? Jessa said, 1 week. Give me 1 week. Sarah called. The friend who'd driven 8 hours to help her, who'd held her hand, who disappeared when things got hard. Sarah said, Val, I saw the news. I believe you. I can't publicly support you. Mark's job, Brandon's family has connections everywhere. If I come forward, Mark could lose his position. We have 3 kids, a mortgage. I'm so sorry. Valerie said, I have a daughter, who I can't even hold. Sarah said, I know, and I'm so sorry, but I have to protect my family. Valerie said, I thought you were my family. Sarah said, I'm sorry. The line went dead. That's when Valerie understood completely. No one was coming, not her friend, not the public, not social media justice. If she was going to get Grace back, she had to be her own hero, and the documentary was about to make that possible. Beneath the Surface, the Mitchell family secret released on YouTube on a Tuesday morning. Jessa had worked around the clock to finish it. 90 minutes of truth, carefully edited, powerfully told. The opening shot was Valerie holding a photo of baby Grace, taken through the NICU window with a phone camera. The only photo she had. Valerie said on camera, my name is Valerie Harper. 6 months ago, I was married to Brandon Mitchell. This is my story. The documentary was devastating and comprehensive. Valerie's testimony came first. The timeline of abuse, medical records, photos of bruises, hospital visits, police reports, text messages from Brandon's phone, everything documented, time-stamped, proven. Then Rebecca Sullivan appeared, Brandon's first wife from 15 years ago. Rebecca said, I signed an NDA. I'm breaking it now. He almost killed me when I was pregnant. Just like Valerie, I woke up in the hospital with a fractured skull and broken ribs. He told police I fell downstairs. They believed him because he was rich and I was nobody. Rebecca showed her scars, old medical records from 15 years ago that detailed injuries consistent with assault, not a fall. 3 other ex-girlfriends came forward, all with similar stories, all silenced by NDAs, by money, by fear, all willing to speak now because they couldn't let it happen to another woman. Former Mitchell household staff testified, described what they witnessed, how they were fired if they didn't sign statements supporting Brandon, how they were threatened if they talked. Detective Rodriguez appeared on camera. This is a textbook case of domestic violence and institutional abuse of power. The Mitchell family has used wealth and influence to intimidate victims for years. The documentary exposed financial crimes too. Patricia's embezzlement from the family charity, $200,000 that should have gone to women's shelters, pocketed instead. It showed Margaret's pattern. 3 different women over 2 decades, all involved with Gregory or Brandon, all intimidated into silence. It painted a picture of a family that believed money could buy immunity from consequences. But the real bombshell came near the end. Christine appeared. In shadow, voice disguised. She said, I was recruited to help break up Brandon and Valerie's marriage. Margaret promised if I helped, Brandon would marry me and I'd be financially secure. Safe from my own abusive ex-boyfriend. I thought I was escaping. I thought I was making a smart choice. But I just joined a different nightmare. Her voice broke. He hit me last month. First time. Pushed me down when I asked about wedding expenses. Now I'm pregnant and trapped, just like Valerie was. I'm telling this story because I can't let him do to our daughter what he's trying to do to Valerie's. I'm telling this because I'm next and I know it. The documentary went viral immediately. 500,000 views in the first hour, 2 million by end of day, 10 million by end of week. Hashtag Justice for Valerie trended nationally, but also hashtag Gold Digger Lies pushed by Mitchell PR team. The public was divided, comment sections became battlegrounds. But enough people believed, enough people saw the truth, and that made the difference. Business consequences started immediately. Mitchell Luxury Auto lost their major partnership with the German manufacturer. The company released a statement. We cannot be associated with allegations of this nature. 3 dealerships faced boycotts, protesters outside with signs, don't buy from abusers. Brandon's investors pulled out. Stock prices plummeted. Local news picked up the story. National news followed. Suddenly, Brandon Mitchell wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was a cautionary tale. Legal consequences followed. The district attorney opened an investigation into Margaret's charity fraud. The medical board investigated the doctor who illegally gave Mitchell family Valerie's confidential records. Judge Rodriguez ordered a new custody evaluation with an independent evaluator, someone without Mitchell family connections. Monica called Valerie. We have momentum. Now we push. That's when Adrian revealed something he had been holding back. They met at Monica's office a week after the documentary dropped. Valerie still hadn't seen Grace except for 2 one-hour supervised visits where Brandon's lawyer sat in the room taking notes on everything she said. Adrian said, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you from the beginning. Valerie said, what? Adrian said, Brandon's dealerships owe my company $2 million. Software licensing fees they've been dodging for 18 months. When I first heard your story, I saw an opportunity. Bad publicity, he'd have to pay up or face worse. That's why I got involved initially. Valerie stared at him. So this was about money for you? Adrian said, at first, yes, but not anymore. Now it's about you and Grace and making sure he never hurts anyone again. I'm sorry I wasn't honest from the start. Valerie thought about it, thought about whether she cared about his motives, decided she didn't. She said, you still help me. That's more than anyone else did. Your reasons don't change the result. Adrian said, thank you for understanding. Valerie said, what happens now? Adrian said, now you show them you're not broken. Brandon and Christine are getting married next month. Big wedding, trying to rehabilitate his image. You should go. Valerie said, why would I do that? Adrian said, because showing up strong is the best revenge. Not hiding, not being ashamed. Being powerful. You go to that wedding on my arm, his image takes another hit, his dealerships lose more value. I get my money, and you get to show him you're not broken. Valerie said, I don't want to use you. Adrian said, we're using each other. Strategic partnership. One night, that's all. Valerie thought about it. Thought about walking into that room where they'd tried to destroy her. Thought about Grace and fighting for her. She said, okay, let's do it. But first there was the custody hearing, the big one, the one that would determine everything. It was scheduled for 1 week before Brandon's wedding. Perfect timing. Courtroom packed with media, public supporters, women who'd seen the documentary and wanted to witness justice. Mitchell lawyers presented their case. Valerie's supposed mental instability, lack of income, living in a shelter, everything designed to make her look unfit. Then Monica stood up. Monica presented medical records of abuse, testimony from Rebecca, police reports, documentary evidence that had been seen by millions, character witnesses who testified to Valerie's strength, her determination, her love for her daughter. Valerie testified. Valerie said, I made mistakes. I trusted the wrong man. I ignored red flags because I was in love. But I'm a good mother. I love my daughter, and I will never stop fighting for her. Mitchell lawyer said, you live in a homeless shelter, Ms. Harper. How can you provide for a child? Valerie said, I'm working with a social worker to get housing assistance. I start a part-time job next week at a nonprofit that helps domestic violence survivors. And I have people who believe in me. That's more than Brandon has. He has money. I have character. Adrian, sitting in the gallery, nodded. Brandon testified. Monica cross-examined him like a prosecutor taking apart a defendant's lies. Monica said, Mr. Mitchell, did you hit your wife? Brandon said, she provoked me. She made me. Monica said, yes or no? Did you hit her? Brandon said, it wasn't like she says. Judge Rodriguez said, answer the question, Mr. Mitchell. Brandon said, yes, but circumstances. Judge Rodriguez said, that's all I need to hear. Rebecca testified, powerful emotional testimony about how Brandon had almost killed her 15 years ago when she was 8 months pregnant. Rebecca said, he choked me until I passed out. When I woke up in the hospital, he told me if I ever left, he'd take my baby and I'd never see her again. I was terrified. I signed the NDA. I took his money. I left my daughter with him because I had no choice. She's 20 now. We have no relationship. He made sure of that. I'm not letting him do to Valerie what he did to me. The courtroom was silent except for crying. Then Christine appeared. Surprise witness. Even the Mitchell lawyers didn't know she was coming. She was 5 months pregnant now, showing. She walked slowly to the witness stand, looking scared but determined. Christine said, everything Valerie said is true. Brandon hit me too, last month when I questioned why we needed such an expensive wedding during the boycotts. He pushed me down. Margaret witnessed it and told me to hide the bruises better. This family is built on money and cruelty. I'm leaving Brandon. I'm testifying because I don't want Grace growing up in that house. I don't want my daughter growing up in that house. The courtroom erupted. Judge Rodriguez banged her gavel. Mitchell lawyers tried to object, but it was too late. The damage was done. Judge Rodriguez took a 15-minute recess. When she came back, her face was set. Judge Rodriguez said, I've heard enough. Full custody granted to Valerie Harper, effective immediately. Mr. Mitchell will have supervised visitation only, 2 hours per week, with a monitor present. Restraining order remains in effect. Mr. Mitchell will pay child support in the amount of $5,000 per month, plus a lump sum payment of $250,000 for pain and suffering. This court finds that Mr. Mitchell engaged in systematic abuse and attempted to use the legal system to further abuse the victim. This behavior is reprehensible and will not be tolerated in my courtroom. Valerie broke down crying. Monica hugged her. Monica said, you won. Grace is yours. 2 hours later, Valerie held her daughter for the first time since the hospital. Grace was 3 months old now. Beautiful. Perfect. Hers. Valerie whispered, "I'm never letting you go again." Grace looked up at her with dark eyes that looked like Brandon's but held no cruelty. Just innocence. Just baby wonder. Valerie had her daughter, but she wasn't done yet. Brandon's wedding was in 1 week, and Valerie had an invitation. Table 47, but she wasn't sitting in the back anymore. The silver Bentley pulled up to River Oaks Country Club at precisely 6:15, 15 minutes after the ceremony started. Intentionally late, Adrian had timed it perfectly. The valet's eyes widened. This wasn't a car you saw every day. Even at River Oaks, Adrian stepped out first. Custom tuxedo, confident stride. He walked around, opened Valerie's door, offered his hand. Valerie emerged. She wore a black maternity dress Adrian had insisted on buying. Designer label, elegant, expensive. Not flashy, just powerful. Diamond earrings that had belonged to Adrian's mother. Hairstyle professionally. Makeup subtle but perfect. And in her arms, 7-month-old Grace wearing a tiny designer dress, pink and perfect. Guests stared, whispered. Some pulled out phones to film. Valerie walked past the valet, through the front doors, into the country club she'd once feared. The wedding coordinator rushed over flustered. "I'm sorry, the ceremony has already started. Your table assignment is..." Adrian said smoothly, "We're with the Sterling party. Mr. Sterling is a friend of the groom's business associates." The coordinator's face changed when she recognized Adrian Sterling, tech billionaire, major donor to the country club. Someone you don't dismiss. She said, "Of course, Mr. Sterling, right this way. We have a VIP table." Margaret Mitchell appeared, cutting her off. "Absolutely not. She sits where we assigned her. Table 47, back corner." Adrian looked at Margaret with the kind of cold politeness wealthy people use as a weapon. "I don't believe we've met. Adrian Sterling, Whitmore International. Your son's company currently owes mine $2 million in unpaid licensing fees. I'm here as Miss Harper's guest, and we'll sit where we please." The coordinator, caught between Margaret and a man who could destroy her career, made a choice. She said, "Mr. Sterling, please follow me to the VIP section." Margaret's face turned red, but she couldn't make a scene. Not here, not now. Inside the ceremony space, Brandon stood at the altar with Christine. They were in the middle of vows. Christine looked miserable, uncomfortable in her wedding dress, 5 months pregnant and clearly having second thoughts. Brandon saw Valerie. His face went white. He stumbled over his next words. The officiant said, "Do you, Brandon Mitchell, take Christine to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Brandon stared at Valerie, at Grace, at the life he tried to destroy sitting in the front row instead of hidden in the back. He said, Yes, I do." Christine's turn. She said her vows mechanically, like she was reading from a script she didn't believe in. Grace babbled loudly during the kiss. Valerie didn't shush her. Let her daughter's voice fill the space. The kiss was awkward. Brandon looked over Christine's shoulder at Valerie the entire time. The reception was tense. People kept glancing at Valerie's table. Some supportive, some hostile, all curious. During dinner, Patricia tried to approach, phone out to film. Adrian stood, blocking her. Adrian said, "Put the phone away or I'll have security escort you out." Patricia said, "You can't tell me what to do at my brother's wedding." Adrian said, "Watch me. You're harassing my guest. That's grounds for removal. Try me." Patricia backed off. The toasts began. Gregory gave a short, uncomfortable speech about family and legacy. Margaret talked about the importance of choosing the right partner. The irony was so thick you could cut it. Then Valerie stood. Monica had advised against it. Adrian had warned it might backfire. But Valerie didn't care. She had something to say. She walked to the microphone, Grace on her hip. The room went silent. Valerie said, "I just want to thank Brandon for teaching me what love isn't, for showing me that I'm stronger than I ever knew I could be." She clicked a remote. Behind her, the projection screen lit up. A document appeared. The custody order. Full custody to Valerie Harper. Valerie said, "Congratulations on your wedding. And Christine, congratulations on your pregnancy. I hope your daughter grows up knowing her worth, the way mine will." She put up another image, a photo of Grace, happy and thriving, taken just that morning. Valerie said, "That's all. Enjoy your party." She handed the microphone back, walked out with Adrian and Grace. Half the room applauded. The other half sat in shocked silence. The video hit social media within minutes. Someone had filmed the whole thing. Woman confronts abusive ex at his wedding went viral. 15 million views in 48 hours. Comments were divided. Queen energy. She's bitter and can't move on. This is petty, but I love it. This is perfect revenge. She should have just stayed home. She's my hero. The video was everywhere. News outlets picked it up. Talk shows discussed it. Everyone had an opinion. But then came the backlash. Mitchell lawyers filed an emergency motion to revisit custody. Use the viral video as evidence. Their argument, Valerie Harper is vindictive, unstable, and performative. She used her child as a prop for public revenge. This proves she's unfit to have custody. She's exploiting her daughter for social media attention. Monica called Valerie furious. "They're going to use your moment against you. This is exactly what I warned about." Valerie said, "I shouldn't have done it. I let my anger." Adrian said, "No. You showed Grace that you don't hide, that you don't let bullies shame you into corners. That's important." Monica said, "We'll fight this. But Valerie, no more public confrontations. Please let the legal system work." The motion hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, Valerie moved out of the shelter and into a small apartment. Social services helped with first month's rent. She started her job at the nonprofit, helping other women escape situations like hers. Grace thrived. She was crawling now, babbling, becoming a person. Every day with her was a gift Valerie never took for granted. But the legal battle wasn't over. The Mitchells had money and time and determination. They weren't giving up. The motion hearing came. Judge Rodriguez, still presiding, listened to Mitchell lawyers argue that Valerie's viral moment proved instability. Then Monica stood up. Monica said, "Your Honor, what my client did was show up to a public event she was invited to. She didn't cause a scene. She didn't threaten anyone. She made a brief statement and left. If that's grounds for reconsidering custody, then every parent who's ever spoken at a PDA meeting is unfit." Judge Rodriguez said, "Ms. Graves has a point. The video shows Miss Harper being calm and controlled. Speaking truth isn't instability." Motion denied. Custody remains with Ms. Harper. Valerie cried with relief. But she'd learned something from that viral moment. She'd learned that performance wasn't the same as power. That revenge might feel good, but it didn't heal anything. 6 months later, Brandon tried again. Quiet wedding, small ceremony, new girlfriend who was also pregnant. The pattern continued. This time, Valerie didn't make a spectacle. She did something quieter, something more powerful. Brandon's second wedding was different, quiet, private. A small venue in Houston, not the country club. Fewer than 50 guests. No media, no spectacle. Just a quick ceremony to make things legal before the baby was born. His new girlfriend was named Jennifer. 26 years old, worked as a receptionist at one of his dealerships. 5 months pregnant. She thought she was special. She thought she was different. Valerie knew better. She'd been Jennifer once. The invitation never came. But Valerie found out the date and location through Monica's sources. The legal case was technically closed, but Monica stayed in touch, kept an eye on Brandon, made sure he followed court orders. On the wedding day, Valerie drove to the venue. No Bentley this time, just her used Honda Civic. She wore a simple sundress. Grace, now 13 months old and toddling, wore a regular baby dress from Target. No Adrian, no cameras, no performance. Valerie walked in quietly, sat in the back row, just watched. The ceremony was happening when she arrived. Brandon at the altar with Jennifer, who looked nervous and hopeful and doomed. The officiant was reading vows. Jennifer was crying, happy tears. Then Brandon looked back, saw Valerie, saw Grace. Grace, who didn't understand any of this, waved at him. Dada! She'd learned that word 2 months ago. She said it to men at the grocery store, on TV, to everyone. She didn't know Brandon, but she knew that word. Brandon's voice broke. He tried to keep reading his vows, but couldn't. Started crying. Not from anger this time, from grief, from loss, from realizing what he'd destroyed. His new bride looked confused. "Brandon, what's wrong?" Brandon couldn't answer. He was staring at the daughter he'd tried to control and lost instead. At the ex-wife who'd survived him. At the life he could have had if he'd been a different man. The officiant said awkwardly, "Should we continue?" Brandon said, "Yes, sorry, yes." They finished the ceremony. It felt hollow. Even Jennifer could tell something was wrong. After they were pronounced husband and wife, after the kiss, after the applause, Valerie stood, picked up Grace. Brandon saw her leaving, called out, "Valerie, wait." She stopped, turned, looked at him. Brandon said, Can I just see her for a minute?" Valerie looked at Grace, then at Brandon, at the man who'd hurt her, manipulated her, tried to take her daughter, at the man who was now someone else's problem. She said, "No, you get 2 supervised hours a week. That's what the court ordered. If you want more, follow the rules." Brandon said, "She's my daughter too." Valerie said, "Then you should have acted like her father instead of treating her like property." She walked out, quiet, dignified, powerful. No speeches this time, no viral moments, just, "You're never going to know her. That's your punishment, living with what you threw away." In the parking lot, Adrian was waiting. He'd driven separately, giving Valerie space to do this her way. He said, "How did it go?" Valerie said, "I told him no, and it felt better than any speech I could have given." Adrian smiled. "Want to get ice cream?" Valerie looked at Grace. "It's 10 in the morning." Grace said, "Isakin." Audioria said, "The baby has spoken." They went for ice cream, because sometimes the victory isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's just choosing joy instead of revenge. Over the next 2 years, life settled into a new rhythm. Valerie got promoted at the nonprofit. She was helping other women escape situations like hers, using her experience to guide them through the legal system, through shelters, through rebuilding. Grace grew, started preschool, learned to say mama more than any other word. Had no memory of the first year of her life, of hospitals and courtrooms and custody battles. To her, life had always been this: small apartment, mother who loved her, occasional visits with a man called Dad who she didn't quite understand. Brandon's supervised visitations became less frequent. He'd cancel more often than not. New wife, new baby, new problems. Grace became an obligation he resented instead of a daughter he loved, which was fine with Valerie. She'd learned that blood doesn't make family. Love does, and Grace had plenty of love. Adrian remained in their lives, not as a savior, not as a father figure, just as someone who cared. He and Valerie started dating properly about a year after the custody case ended. Slow, careful, both of them damaged in their own ways. Adrian was awkward with kids but tried. He read Grace picture books with robot-like inflection that made her giggle. He learned to change diapers, badly. He showed up consistently without trying to take over. Valerie got pregnant again when Grace was 2. Unplanned, but wanted. Adrian's baby this time. A choice, not a trap. They got married quietly. Courthouse ceremony. Monica as witness. Grace as flower girl. No family drama. No country clubs. Just 2 people choosing each other. The Mitchell family faced consequences, slowly but surely. Patricia was convicted of embezzlement. Probation and restitution, though no jail time because rich people rarely see jail. Margaret and Gregory divorced. Turns out covering for abuse for 40 years takes a toll on a marriage. Brandon's dealerships continued to struggle. 2 closed completely. The Mitchell name, once synonymous with luxury and success, became associated with scandal. Christine had her baby, a girl. She left Brandon when the baby was 6 months old, filed for divorce, citing abuse, used Valerie's documentary as evidence, got full custody without much fight. The pattern was breaking. Slowly. One woman at a time. Jennifer, the new wife, lasted 8 months. She showed up at the nonprofit where Valerie worked, bruised and pregnant with her second child. She said, "You were right about everything." Valerie helped her because that's what survivors do. They help the next woman, and the next, and the next. 2 years after that first wedding, Valerie sat on a playground bench in Denver. They'd moved from Dallas, needed a fresh start. Mountains instead of flat Texas land. Clean air instead of heavy humidity. Grace, now 3 years old, played on the swings. Mama? Mama? Higher. Valerie was 6 months pregnant with her second daughter. Adrian sat beside her with coffee, watching Grace with the focus of someone still learning how to be part of a family. Grace ran over. Mama, watch this. She attempted a cartwheel, fell, laughed, got back up. Valerie said, you fell, you got back up. That's my girl. Grace beamed. Again, she tried again. Fell again, laughed again. Valerie thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, opening that cream envelope with gold embossing. Table 47, the back corner where shameful things belong. She'd shown up in a Bentley, made a viral moment, got her revenge on social media, but that wasn't what saved her. That wasn't what got Grace back. What saved her was refusing to disappear, refusing to be ashamed, documenting everything, getting good lawyers, speaking truth even when no one wanted to hear it. What saved her, saving herself. People ask if she regrets going to that wedding in the Bentley. The theatrical moment, the viral video, she doesn't. Because she needed to prove to herself that she could walk into that room and not be afraid. That she could stand in front of people who hurt her and not break. But the second wedding, quiet, simple, just showing up, that's when she understood real power. Real power isn't performance. It's presence. It's surviving. It's waking up every day and choosing to keep going. Real power is raising her daughter to know her worth, to recognize red flags, to never accept cruelty disguised as love. Real power is helping other women escape before it's too late. Sometimes Valerie's story gets told in the nonprofit circles. The woman who went from homeless shelter to helping others. The woman who faced down a powerful family and won. They call it inspiring. They call her brave. Valerie doesn't feel brave. She feels lucky. Lucky that Adrian saw her story and helped. Lucky that Monica was brilliant. Lucky that Judge Rodriguez was fair. Lucky that the documentary went viral. So many women don't get lucky. So many women end up like Katie, Adrian's sister. Like the women whose names fill domestic violence statistics. Valerie survived, and she knows how easily she could have not survived. That's why she works at the nonprofit. Why she speaks at schools about healthy relationships. Why she lets her story be told, even when it's painful to relive. Because maybe her survival can help someone else survive. Maybe her voice can help someone else find theirs. Adrian joined them at the playground, handing Valerie a coffee and a cookie. He said, Grace wants ice cream again. Valerie said, it's 10 in the morning. Adrian said, she's very persuasive. She gets that from you. Grace ran over. Ice cream, Mama? Peas? Valerie looked at her daughter, 3 years old, happy, healthy, safe, loved. She said, fine. Ice cream for breakfast. We're already breaking all the rules. Adrian said, that's my girls. To Valerie softly, both of you. He kissed her forehead, not possessive like Brandon used to be, just loving. They walked toward the ice cream truck together. Little family that had been built from broken pieces. Not perfect, but real, but theirs. That night after Grace was asleep, after Adrian had gone home to his place, they still kept separate apartments, taking things slow. Valerie sat down to write. The nonprofit had asked her to contribute to a handbook for survivors. Tips for women trying to escape, legal advice, resources, stories of hope. She wrote, if you're sitting at your own table 47 right now, whether it's an abusive marriage, a toxic job, a family that diminishes you, hear this. You don't need a billionaire. You don't need a Bentley. You don't need their validation. You need your voice, your truth, your refusal to be erased. They tried to shame me by putting me in the back corner. They only freed me. Document everything, every bruise, every text, every threat. Evidence saves lives. Find your people. Even one person who believes you can change everything. Use the system even when the system is broken. Fight even when fighting seems pointless. And know this, you are not saved. You are not rescued. You survive. And that's your superpower. She saved the document, sent it to the nonprofit director. Then she went to Grace's room, watched her daughter sleep, tiny chest rising and falling, peaceful, protected. Valerie whispered, "I fought for you, and I'd do it again, 1,000 times." Grace stirred but didn't wake. Valerie went to her own bed, lay down, put her hand on her pregnant belly where her second daughter grew. 2 daughters, 2 chances to raise women who wouldn't accept what Valerie had accepted, who wouldn't ignore red flags, who wouldn't believe that love meant control. 2 daughters who would know their worth from birth. That was the real victory. Not the viral moment, not the custody win, not even the justice system finally working. The real victory was breaking the cycle. Valerie fell asleep thinking about the future, about Grace's first day of school, about teaching her to ride a bike, about the baby who would arrive in 3 months, about Adrian, who was learning to be part of a family, about the women she'd help tomorrow at the nonprofit, about a life that was hers, finally completely hers. She'd sat at table 47. But she didn't stay there. She stood up, walked out, built something better. And that, more than anything else, was what freedom felt like. 3 years after Grace's birth, Valerie Harper stood in front of a congressional committee. She never imagined she'd be here, but Adrian's legal fund had grown into a national movement. Domestic violence survivors were speaking up, laws were changing, and Valerie's documentary had become a case study in how social media could drive social change. The hearing room was formal, intimidating. Senators sat at an elevated bench. Reporters filled the gallery. Cameras recorded everything. Senator Patricia Williams said, "Ms. Harper, thank you for your testimony today. Your story has touched millions of people. What would you say to women who are currently in situations like yours was?" Valerie looked at the microphone, thought about all the women watching, all the women afraid to leave. She said, "I'd tell them that the hardest step is the first one. Admitting you need help, admitting you're in danger. We're taught to keep family secrets, to protect our partners, to fix things with love. But you can't love someone into not hurting you. You can only save yourself." Senator Williams said, "What changes do you think we need to make legislatively?" Valerie said, "Prenuptial agreements shouldn't be used as weapons. I signed away my rights without understanding what I was signing. We need mandatory domestic violence screenings during prenatal care. My doctor saw my bruises but couldn't do anything because I said I was fine. We need better funding for shelters. Safe havens saved my life, but they're chronically underfunded. We need judges trained in domestic violence dynamics. And we need consequences for wealthy abusers who use the legal system to continue abuse after physical separation." She glanced at the gallery. Adrian sat there holding Grace, Monica beside them, Christine too, with her daughter, Rebecca in the back row. All the women whose stories had become part of a larger movement. Valerie continued, "But mostly we need to stop teaching women that love means sacrifice. That's how this starts. We're told to compromise, to understand, to forgive. And abusers weaponize that. They use our capacity for love against us. We need to teach girls and boys that love doesn't hurt, that boundaries are healthy, that walking away is sometimes the bravest thing you can do." The committee thanked her. The cameras stopped rolling, but the work continued. That night, there was a gala for Adrian's legal fund. Fancy hotel ballroom in Washington, D.C. All the people who'd helped Valerie were there, plus donors, politicians, other survivors. Valerie wore another designer dress, but this time she'd bought it herself, with money from her nonprofit salary and speaking fees from her story. She didn't need Adrian's help anymore, though she appreciated it when he offered. Grace, now 3.5, wore a matching dress. She held Valerie's hand as they walked into the ballroom. Grace said, "Mama, why are all these people here?" Valerie said, "They're here to help other mamas who need help, like Miss Monica helped me." Grace said, "You help people too." Valerie smiled, "I try." At dinner, Valerie sat at a table with Adrian, Monica, Detective Rodriguez, Jessa the filmmaker, and several other survivors who'd become advocates. Adrian stood to give a speech. He talked about his sister Katie, about the guilt he'd carried, about turning that guilt into action. He said, 5 years ago, I couldn't save my sister. But in that time, this fund has helped 300 women escape abusive situations. We've provided legal representation, housing assistance, job training. We've funded shelters, lobbied for legislation, changed corporate policies around domestic violence leave, and we're just getting started. Applause filled the room. Adrian continued, but I want to be clear. I didn't do this. We didn't do this. The survivors did this. Women like Valerie, who refused to be silent, who told their stories even when it was terrifying, who helped the next woman in the next. That's what creates change. Not money, not power, truth. More applause. Valerie felt tears in her eyes. Later, while Grace played with other children in a supervised area, Valerie and Adrian stepped onto the hotel balcony. Cool DC night air, city lights below. Adrian said, "You were incredible today, at the hearing." Valerie said, "I was terrified." Adrian said, "Bravery is being terrified and doing it anyway." Valerie said, "You sound like a greeting card." Adrian laughed. "You did unfair, but it's true." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Valerie said, "I've been thinking about something. The documentary ended with me getting custody, but that wasn't really the end. The end is now. 3 years of healing, of building a life, of helping others. That's the part people need to see." Adrian said, "Are you saying you want to do a follow-up documentary?" Valerie said, "Maybe, or maybe just write a book. Tell the whole story. Not just the abuse and escape, but the after. Because survival isn't a moment. It's a daily choice." Adrian said, "I think that's brilliant, and I think you should do it." Valerie said, "Would you help?" Adrian said, "Always. But you don't need my help. You never really did. You needed resources. You needed a platform. But the strength, that was always yours." Inside, Monica found them. "There's someone here who wants to meet you." Valerie followed her back inside. A young woman stood nervously by the entrance. 22, maybe. She looked terrified and determined in equal measure. The young woman said, "Miss Harper, I'm Jessica. I saw your documentary 2 years ago. I was engaged to a man he was like Brandon. The documentary made me realize it. I left before the wedding. My family thought I was crazy. But you saved my life. I just wanted to say thank you." Valerie hugged her. "You saved yourself. I just showed you it was possible." Jessica said, "I'm in school now, social work. I want to help people like us." Valerie said, "The world needs more people like us." That night in the hotel room, after Grace was asleep, Valerie sat on the balcony with her laptop. She opened a new document. Title, After Table 47, A Survivor's Journey. Chapter 1, The Reckoning. She started typing. The full story. Not just the abuse, not just the escape, but the after. The hard work of healing, the therapy, the nightmares, the triggers, the slow process of learning to trust again. The joy of watching Grace grow without fear. The pride of helping other women. The complicated feelings about Brandon. Not love, not hate, just the distant sadness of what could have been if he'd been different. The relationship with Adrian, built on honesty instead of performance. The second pregnancy, chosen this time. The life she'd built from nothing. She wrote until dawn, and for the first time in years, the writing felt like healing instead of testimony. 6 months later, the book published. It became a bestseller. Not because people loved the drama, though some did, but because women everywhere saw themselves in Valerie's story. The slow erosion of self-worth, the isolation, the fear, the moment of choosing survival. Valerie did a book tour, 50 cities in 3 months. Every event, women lined up to tell her their stories. Some had left, some were planning to leave. Some were still trapped, but now had hope. At one event in Minneapolis, Sarah came. Valerie's old friend, the one who'd driven 8 hours to help but couldn't stay. Sarah waited until the line was empty, then approached, crying. Sarah said, "I'm so sorry for not being there when you needed me, for choosing safety over friendship. I've regretted it every day." Valerie hugged her. "You did what you had to do. I understand." Sarah said, "I should have been braver." Valerie said, "Bravery isn't binary. You helped when you could. That mattered." They talked for hours that night, rebuilt a friendship that had fractured under pressure. It would never be the same, but it could be something new, something honest. Grace turned 4, started asking questions about her father. Why doesn't Daddy live with us? Why do I only see him sometimes? Does Daddy love me? Valerie answered honestly but age-appropriately. Daddy made some mistakes. He hurt Mama. So we don't live together anymore. But you're not a mistake. You're the best thing that ever happened to Mama. Grace said, did Daddy hurt you like when I fall and get ouchies? Valerie said, something like that. But Mama is okay now, and you're safe, always. Grace thought about it, then said, okay, can we have pancakes? Children are resilient in ways adults forget to be. Valerie's second daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in March. She named her Katie after Adrian's sister. Adrian cried when she told him. Katie Sterling Harper, a name honoring someone who didn't survive, carried by someone who would grow up knowing her worth. Grace was skeptical of the new baby at first. She's loud, and she smells. But within days, Grace was protective. That's my baby sister. Be careful with her. Valerie watched her daughters and thought, this is what I fought for. Not revenge, not vindication. This, a family built on choice and love instead of control and fear. Brandon saw Grace according to court orders. Every other week, 2 hours, supervised. He'd show up late more often than not, spend the time on his phone while Grace played. He'd remarried again, wife number 3, and had another baby on the way. The pattern continued, but it was no longer Valerie's problem. Grace asked once, why is Daddy always looking at his phone when I'm there? Valerie said, some people don't know how to be present. That's their loss, not yours. You are worthy of attention and love. Remember that always. Grace said, I know, Mama. You tell me every day. Valerie said, good. I never want you to forget. 5 years after the custody battle, Valerie was invited back to Safe Haven Shelter. They were renaming a wing in her honor. She stood in front of current residents, women in various stages of escape, some fresh from the ER, some planning their next move, some just trying to survive another day. Valerie said, I sat where you're sitting 5 years ago. Pregnant, alone, convinced I'd lost everything. But I was wrong. I hadn't lost everything. I'd lost my prison. And that's when I started to find myself. A woman in the front row raised her hand. How did you stop being afraid? Valerie said, I didn't. I'm still afraid sometimes. Fear doesn't go away completely, but it gets quieter. It becomes background noise instead of a siren. You learn to do things afraid, and eventually you realize you're not doing it afraid anymore. You're just doing it. Another woman asked, do you ever regret leaving? Valerie said, never. Not once. Not even on the hardest days. Because the hardest day free is better than the easiest day in a cage. That night back home in Denver, Valerie tucked Grace into bed. Grace was 5 now, about to start kindergarten. Grace said, Mama, I was the bravest person today. I went down the big slide. Valerie said, you were so brave. I'm proud of you. Grace said, were you brave today? Valerie thought about the speech at the shelter, about the women who'd cried and thanked her, about the long road from table 47 to here. She said, I tried to be. Every day I try to be brave like you. Grace said, you're the bravest person I know, Mama. Valerie's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, baby. Grace said, can you tell me the story about the princess who saved herself? It was Grace's favorite bedtime story, one Valerie had written for her. A princess who didn't wait for rescue, who picked up her own sword, fought her own battles, saved her own kingdom. Valerie told the story. Grace fell asleep before the ending. But that was okay. Grace would hear it again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, until she internalized it, until she knew, bone deep, that she could save herself. That was Valerie's real legacy, not the viral video, not the best-selling book, not even the laws that had changed because of her testimony. Her real legacy was raising daughters who would never accept what she'd accepted, who would see red flags as stop signs instead of colorful decorations, who would know that they deserved better than cruelty disguised as love. Valerie left Grace's room, checked on baby Katie sleeping peacefully in her crib, and found Adrian in the kitchen making tea. He said, good speech today? Valerie said, I hope so. It's hard to know if anything I say helps. Adrian said, It helps, trust me. Every woman you talk to, every story you tell, it plants a seed. Maybe that seed saves someone's life. Valerie said, I hope you're right. Adrian said, I am, because your story saved lives already, mine included. Valerie looked at him, surprised. Yours? Adrian said, after Katie died, I was drowning in guilt. Your case gave me purpose. Helping you helped me forgive myself. Not completely. I'll never completely forgive myself for missing the signs with Katie, but enough to keep living, enough to build something good from something terrible. They sat together drinking tea, two broken people who'd found a way to be whole together. The next morning, Valerie woke up to Grace singing in her room, off-key but enthusiastic, some song about princesses and adventures. She checked her phone, an email from another survivor. Thank you for your story. I left yesterday. I'm scared, but I'm safe. Valerie responded, you did the hardest part. It gets easier from here. You've got this. She got up, made coffee, looked out the window at Denver mountains, thought about the woman she'd been 6 years ago, opening that cream envelope. Table 47. That woman would barely recognize her now. Stronger, scarred, but whole, free. The invitation had seemed like an insult, sitting in the back, being shamed, being hidden. But it had become something else, a catalyst, a moment that forced her to choose, accept the shame or reject it. She'd rejected it, first loudly in a Bentley with viral drama, then quietly with daily choices to survive and thrive. Both mattered. The loud moment got attention. The quiet moments built a life. Valerie finished her coffee, went to wake up Grace, started another day of the life she'd fought for. A life at no table but her own. A life she'd built from nothing. A life that was finally, completely, authentically hers. 10 years after she fled the Mitchell mansion in pajamas, Valerie Harper stood in her own house. Not a mansion. A 3-bedroom home in suburban Denver with a mortgage she paid herself in a yard where Grace and Katie played. Grace was 13 now, sharp-tongued and confident in ways that sometimes terrified Valerie. She looked like Brandon, but had none of his cruelty. She was captain of her debate team, had strong opinions about everything, and took exactly zero nonsense from anyone. Katie was 8, quieter than Grace, but equally fierce when it mattered. She loved science, wanted to be a marine biologist, collected facts about octopi, the way some kids collected Pokemon cards. Both girls knew their mother's story, age-appropriate versions, but the truth. They knew about domestic violence, about survival, about the importance of recognizing red flags. They also knew about love, about Adrian, who'd married their mother when Grace was 7 and Katie was 3, who showed up consistently, who listened more than he talked, who proved that good men existed even after bad ones. Valerie was 42 now, director of the nonprofit she had started working at a decade ago. The organization had expanded to 5 shelters across Colorado. They'd helped thousands of women, saved countless lives. She still did speaking engagements sometimes, though less frequently now. Her book had done its work. The laws had changed. The conversation had shifted, at least a little. But mostly she lived a quiet life, the kind of unremarkable daily existence she'd craved when everything was chaos. She made breakfast, drove kids to school, did boring paperwork at the office, came home, made dinner, helped with homework, watched bad TV with Adrian, fell asleep early. It was beautiful in its mundanity. Brandon Mitchell had faded from their lives mostly. He'd been married and divorced 3 more times, had 6 children with 5 different women. Grace was the oldest. He'd aged poorly. The stress of failed businesses, failed marriages, public scandal had taken its toll. He looked older than 47, tired, diminished. Grace still saw him occasionally. Court-ordered visits had ended when she turned 12, but she'd chosen to maintain some contact. Not because she loved him, she didn't know him well enough to love him, but because she felt sorry for him and in the way you feel sorry for stray dogs you can't quite save. Grace told Valerie once, he's sad all the time, like he knows he messed everything up, but doesn't know how to fix it. Valerie said, some people don't figure it out in time. Grace said, "Did you ever forgive him?" Valerie thought about it. "Forgiveness is complicated. I don't actively hate him anymore. The anger faded years ago, but I also don't forget. Forgiveness without forgetting feels like neutrality. He's just someone who used to hurt me. He can't hurt me anymore. That's enough." Grace said, "That makes sense." Margaret Mitchell died when Grace was 10, lung cancer. She'd smoked secretly for 50 years, hiding it like she'd hidden everything else. At the funeral, Valerie and Grace attended. Not out of love, but out of acknowledgement. Margaret had been Grace's grandmother, even if she'd been a terrible one. Brandon gave the eulogy, talked about his mother like she'd been a saint, rewrote history the way families do at funerals. After, he approached Valerie and Grace. First time they'd been in the same room in years. Brandon said to Grace, "You look so grown up." Grace said, "I'm 10. Awkward silence. Brandon said to Valerie, "Thank you for bringing her." Valerie said, "I brought her for her, not for you." Brandon nodded, looked like he wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. Finally, "I'm sorry for everything. I know it doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry." Valerie looked at him, at this diminished man who had once terrified her. She felt nothing, not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity, just nothing. She said, "Okay." That was all. She took Grace's hand and left. In the car, Grace said, "Do you think he meant it? The apology?" Valerie said, "Maybe, but it doesn't matter. Apologies don't erase harm. They're just words. What matters is what someone does after they apologize. And he's done nothing." And Grace said, "Then why did you say okay?" Valerie said, "Because engaging would give him power he doesn't deserve. Okay meant I heard you, I don't care, we're done here." Grace thought about it, then said, "That's pretty savage, Mom." Valerie smiled. "I learned from the best. You." On Valerie's 42nd birthday, Adrian threw her a surprise party. Nothing huge, just close friends and family. Monica, Detective Rodriguez, Jessa, women from the nonprofit, a few neighbors. Grace and Katie had made a cake that was lopsided but enthusiastic. They decorated the house with streamers. It was perfect in its imperfection. Monica gave a toast. To Valerie, who taught us all that survival isn't passive. It's the most active, powerful choice you can make. Who showed us that you can go from homeless shelter to helping thousands of others? Who proved that one woman's voice can change systems? Happy birthday, friend. Everyone clinked glasses. Later, after guests left, after kids were in bed, Valerie and Adrian sat on their back porch. Denver night air cool, stars visible despite city lights. Adrian said, "Good birthday?" Valerie said, "The best." Adrian said, "Can I ask you something?" Valerie said, "Always?" Adrian said, "Do you ever think about what your life would have been if you'd taken the 100,000, if you'd signed the NDA and walked away?" Valerie thought about it. She'd wondered this before. Late nights when sleep wouldn't come. What if she'd taken the money, terminated the pregnancy, started over somewhere else? She said, "Sometimes, but I don't think I could have lived with myself. Giving up Grace to avoid fighting for her? That's not survival, that's surrender. And I'd already surrendered too much of myself to that family. I couldn't surrender her too." Adrian said, "You saved her life." Valerie said, "She saved mine. Being pregnant gave me a reason to fight. Without her, I might have just given up, accepted that I deserved what I was getting. Grace made me realize I had to be worth something because she needed me to be." They sat in comfortable silence. Decade together had taught them silence could be as communicative as words. Finally, Valerie said, "I used to think happiness was a destination, that if I just got through the abuse, through the custody battle, through the public scrutiny, I'd arrive at happy and stay there. But that's not how it works." Adrian said, "No." Valerie said, "Happiness is daily. It's choosing joy in small moments. Grace's terrible jokes, Katie's octopus facts, your really bad cooking that you keep insisting will improve. This, right here, this is happiness, not a destination, a practice, Boamon." Adrian said, "My cooking isn't that bad." Valerie laughed. "It really is." Adrian said, "Fair enough." That night, Valerie couldn't sleep. She went to her office, a small room she'd claimed as hers, full of books and files and photos of women she'd helped. She opened her laptop. The book she'd been working on for 3 years, a memoir about life after survival, was almost done, just needed an ending. She read what she'd written, the story of the last decade, the healing process, the therapy, the nightmares that eventually faded, the trust she'd learned to rebuild, the relationship with Adrian, the joy of watching her daughters grow, the work at the nonprofit, the women saved, the lives rebuilt. Then she wrote the ending. People ask me if I've forgiven Brandon Mitchell. The truth is, forgiveness is too simple a word for what I feel. I don't hate him. I don't wish him harm, but I also don't absolve him. He made choices. Those choices had consequences. I've forgiven myself. That was harder. Forgiving myself for ignoring red flags, for staying too long, for believing his apologies, for almost losing my daughter because I couldn't see what was right in front of me. But I've learned that victims aren't responsible for abuse. I didn't cause his violence. I didn't deserve his cruelty. I was targeted because I was kind, trusting, and vulnerable. Those aren't weaknesses. They're beautiful human qualities that abusers exploit. I'm proud of who I am now. I'm proud of my daughters. I'm proud of the work I do. I'm proud that I turned trauma into purpose. But I want to be clear about something. I am not grateful for what happened. Sometimes people say, everything happens for a reason, or you're stronger because of what you survived. That's not true. I'm strong despite what I survived, not because of it. I would be a different kind of strong if I'd never been abused. Maybe softer, maybe happier, maybe less vigilant. Abuse doesn't make you strong. Surviving it does. And I'd rather women never need to develop that particular strength. So to anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, you are not alone. You are believed. You can survive this. Document everything. Find one person who believes you. Use whatever resources you can access. Leave when you can, however you can. And know this, they tried to shame me by putting me at table 47, by making me sit in the back corner where embarrassing things go, but I stood up, I walked out, I built my own table, and you can too. You don't need a billionaire. You don't need a Bentley. You don't need their validation. You need your voice, your truth, your refusal to be erased. I am not saved. I am not rescued. I survived. And so can you. Valerie saved the document, sent it to her editor. The book would publish in 6 months. Maybe it would help someone. Maybe it would just be her story, out in the world, proving she'd been here and Soraya mattered. She closed her laptop, checked on Grace and Katie, both sleeping soundly. Went back to her bedroom where Adrian was snoring softly. She climbed into bed, looked at her husband's peaceful face, thought about the journey from that first night when she climbed out a bathroom window with nothing but terror and determination. 10 years, 4 custody hearings, 2 weddings, 1 viral, 1 quiet, 1 documentary, 1 best-selling book, 2 beautiful daughters, 1 rebuilt life. She'd arrived in a Bentley. She'd made the viral moment. She'd had her revenge. But the real victory was quieter. It was this, a normal Tuesday night in a normal house with a normal family doing normal things. The Mitchell family had wanted to erase her, make her disappear, shame her into silence. Instead, she'd become more visible than ever. Her story had reached millions. Her work had saved thousands. Her daughters would grow up strong and unafraid. That was the power they couldn't take, the power to define her own story, to choose her own table, to live on her own terms. Valerie Harper closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd wake up, make breakfast, go to work, help another woman escape another nightmare. She'd come home, make dinner, help with homework, fall asleep next to someone who loved her safely. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't going to go viral. But it was hers. Finally, completely, authentically hers. And that was the happy ending she'd fought for. Not a fairy tale, just a life, just freedom, just peace.